we need to make the energy transition because our energy prices are very high.
So what are the best practices you have seen globally?
Only if you have a clear plan, you can execute. And I think that's also the biggest problem.
What is good and what is bad in Latvia now, in the tax system?
And the one thing that companies want, if they want to invest in a country, is predictability and stability.
Competitiveness, or a bit of a lack of it, has been in the spotlight also during the last 6 or 12 months.
But first, you need to determine kind of what is the kind of economy that I want to stimulate.
Hello, our Swedbank private banking customers. We have the honor to keep on bringing to you world-class speakers on topics of economic and financial market development and investments. And today's guest is another fantastic example of that. I would like to introduce to you Marlies De Ruiter.
Thank you so much. We're so happy to be here.
Yes, and very, very happy to have you here today as well. And a short introduction on you. Marlies is a world-leading global tax expert, having served in various global tax leadership positions. For the last 8 years, Marlies serves as a partner and global international tax policy leader at Ernst&Young. And in addition, Marlies is constantly involved with different global institutions like the European Union and OECD, and in the later she has also served in tax leadership positions historically. And I understand your focus is work on countries' competitiveness and strategic development with the help of tax policies, and with a particular emphasis on how to balance growing state budget needs with an ability to offer investors more competitive and stable tax policies, thus promoting economic growth. I think a very necessary focus nowadays indeed. And I look forward to hearing the best global market practice from you today. But my first question to you is, what brings you to Riga?
Yes, so as global leader and being located in EMEA, I'm from the Netherlands, we also have a specific responsibility for EU. We have a EU tax policy hub. And of course, that is in Brussels with all the EU institutions. But the member states are also very important. So what we like to do as a team, we like to visit the different EU member states to get a bit of a perspective on what's happening in the EU and both kind of at the central level, but also locally. So that's why I'm here, and I'm enjoying it very, very much.
I'm glad you came over. And I guess my first question to you is, how to balance the country's needs for budget needs with also the economic growth and attracting investment. I understand that basically the aim of tax policy should be to attract investments and make a country more competitive. So how do you do that?
Yeah, and that's kind of the $1 million question
Yes.
at the moment, because kind of competitiveness is at the heart of the agenda of many, many countries, kind of if not all countries in the world. We're in a very competitive environment. We are in a transition. So there's this digital transition, there's the green transition ongoing, the green transition being particularly important for Europe, given that we need to make the energy transition because our energy prices are very high in Europe, and that makes us also uncompetitive. So that means that kind of that competitiveness is at the heart of the agenda. But on the other hand, kind of we also need to fulfill the budget needs. So and how to do that, I think, is a key question. But I think the answer is on the one hand difficult and on the other one easy. I think the easiest way to do it is to have what they have, what they call gross domestic product growth, right? GDP growth. So growing your economy means more tax income. And that's why it's also important to invest, right? Mm-hmm. To invest in your tax policies, to invest in incentives to give to the companies that will be the industries of the future. And that's kind of the square that all the countries want, the circle that all the countries want to square at this moment. They want to come with these policies that promote these investments and result in a growth scenario for the industries that matter in the future.
And you said this is $1 million question, but still trying to answer it. So what are the best practices you have seen globally? How to make a long-term, strategically correct tax policy that makes a country competitive?
And that's exactly the difficult question because there's no one answer. It will depend on the country and what kind of, because ultimately your competitiveness and your economic possibilities are not driven by tax. Tax can get you there. Tax can try to promote kind of behavior by companies to get you into that position. But first, you need to determine kind of what is the kind of economy that I want to stimulate. In the past, kind of having very, very low tax rates or having low tax rate was sufficient to attract business. And that's kind of how some countries became kind of prosperous, kind of like, for example, Singapore, right? They had a very good tax system, kind of with kind of all kinds of policies addressing harmful tax practices, addressing low tax rates. I think it's become more difficult. So the starting point should be, what are the economic strengths of my country? What are the issues that I want to strengthen? And to design a tax system that incentivizes that while it also guarantees enough money coming in. And the most important thing is, I think, to do that, kind of to have a clear plan. Because only if you have a clear plan, you can execute. And I think that's also the biggest problem. Because look at France at the moment. They have big budget deficits. Kind of designing that plan is not easy, because then you may need to have some cost cutting here and there. And some of your voters may not be happy. In order to be able to spend on the things you want for the future. So I think that's a dilemma. It's not easy to get to that tax system, but and to get to that economic policy, but it's very necessary, and it's very important to say that kind of your tax policy is an element of your economic ambitions and strategy. You can't separate the two. You can't say, I have a good tax system, and then the economic kind of consequences will follow automatically. That's not how it works at the moment.
I think last year, reading the news, at least to me, it seemed that the tax topic was very hot, that not only Latvia, but also I think France, UK, Canada were raising taxes and addressing budget issues. What is maybe your comment? What is the reason for that? Is it aging populations, defense spending needs, or was it my impression only that last year this was a hot topic for many countries?
Yes, I think a right impression. I think there are two reasons why tax is a hot topic that you could see in the mainstream media. I think the first is because of what we just also discussed about the fact that there are, first of all, these budget kind of challenges, because countries want to spend more on defense. They want to spend more on incentivizing the green transition or the digital transition. So they need more money. And on the other hand, what you see is that kind of economic growth is quite marginal in the EU. So that extra money is not coming in through growth of the economy. So choices need to be made. And those choices are difficult, because what you need to do is you need to maybe mitigate some spending, for example, in agriculture. And in France, that is absolutely very, very sensitive in order to get to spending on digital. So you see this struggle everywhere. You see this struggle also in the US, where every time there is a kind of a discussion on the deficit ceilings, etc. And this will be a discussion that will be ongoing. But to me, I think the sweet spot that all countries will try to get to is to get to that kind of point where you stimulate growth, and then the growth will pay for kind of all these investments. But that first investment, I think that is the most difficult bit, kind of where you need to decide kind of where to get the money from to make those first investments. And that is also going to be at the heart of the new Commission's agenda, led by Ursula von der Leyen, kind of because competitiveness of the EU will be the most important topic, kind of the coming 5 years.
I wanted to talk about Latvia, but now you touched upon the competitiveness of the EU, and then let's jump into this topic. Because yes, this competitiveness or a bit of a lack of it has been in the spotlight also during the last 6 or 12 months. Also the Mario Draghi report and his presentation sort of put a finger on this. And one part of this on the tax issue, which seems fascinating to me, is that actually within the EU, but not only within the EU, also within the Baltics, where we are three like sister or brother countries, where we are very friendly, but we also compete in a way with our tax policies. And in an ideal world, do you think this is right, that within the EU we have different tax regimes for each country and that the countries are competing among themselves? What is the best way forward for EU in terms of the tax approach?
Yes, and I think if you listen to Mario Draghi, what he is saying is kind of all those different systems, they add costs to businesses. And that's why kind of European businesses are much smaller than US businesses. That's also why European, for example, new startups, they can't scale up very easily because they have to go market by market, and that means that they have to adapt every time to other rules.
So it's better to go to US market straight ahead from Latvia, at least.
I think it's if you look at it from kind of take a step back and you look at it, then you say, yeah, clearly one system would be much cheaper and would make it easier for us to compete with the US or with China and make us bigger as an economic whole. But then I think the question is still within Europe, kind of will all the different countries then have the same power in that competition? And I think that's also a key question, right? That kind of maybe Germany has much more economic power, or France, than smaller economies. And that's also what you want to prevent. So I think one of the hesitations in getting there will be that each of the countries will need to make sure that they get an equal share of, or a relatively equal share of that kind of big pie that will result. And I think that is going to be the big dilemma, because we're used to that competition between the small countries. Kind of, I've been here for 2 days, and all I've heard is yes, but Estonia, yes, but Lithuania are doing this. So that competition is a reality ultimately, and it's also that competition that has driven kind of a lot of growth in Europe too. So I think, yes, we need to have more an EU strategy, but I expect that within that EU strategy, there will still be competition between countries and everyone safeguarding their own interests.
So it will be a mix anyway in the future.
Yes, but hopefully there will be some movement, because the worst thing that can happen is that because countries are safeguarding their own interest, nothing will happen. And then we will lose out kind of in competitiveness to the other big economic powers like the US and China. So the worst thing would be if nothing would happen.
Okay. And then you said before that basically, I guess the first step of making a country competitive is making a strategy of what you want the country to become, and also probably making some non-popular decisions along the way. So basically investing into this strategy. But then let's take Latvia as a case study. We are a relatively small market on the border of the European Union, but a part of the European Union, which is excellent. And you said also before that it has become more difficult to compete with low taxes. And actually Latvia, if you Google it, then Latvia historically has been among the best tax. It has been not awarded, but on the tops of the best tax regimes in the world or within the OECD. But last year, I think there were some movements a bit in a backward direction due to several reasons. One was, I think, targeted at banks, which probably might sort of hinder foreign investors' interest or trust in Latvia. Then another decision, which I think was not probably correct, was also diminishing the contributions to pension levels and taking this money to current budget needs. And the third one was increasing the capital gain tax by more than a fourth, which in my opinion would decrease the interest of people to invest. So basically, my short question, I understand that you have gotten acquainted also with the situation in Latvia. What is good and what is bad in Latvia now in the tax system?
Yes, and you're already mentioning it, right? If you look at kind of how it was and how it is, I think one of the biggest things I'm hearing back, having spoken to a couple of companies, is I think Latvia was very predictable. And the one thing that companies want, if they want to invest in a country, is predictability and stability. It needs to be predictable what's happening. And if it's predictable, they want to pay a bit more. But unpredictability, it's kind of a sin when you want to do business. So I think that unpredictability is probably not kind of doing a lot of good for the business climate. Indeed, kind of Latvia is still ranking quite high when it comes to kind of the business or the tax climate. But the strange thing is that it isn't attracting the same level of economic investments as it did in the past. So I think it's important to think about why is that? Why, if I still have an attractive tax system and they're still ranking very high, why is it that I'm not attracting this investment? And there are several reasons for that.
And what are those?
I think, first of all, I think it's kind of the regulation by the EU. Kind of anti-money laundering is something that really hit kind of the Baltics quite hard, but regulatory costs are very high in the EU compared to other regions. The second thing I think that is the case is that nowadays, kind of to have a good tax system, it needs to be linked to that economic system that I just mentioned, because there are all kinds of rules nowadays in the international tax landscape that make it impossible to move things without creating real economic substance. So you need to link that tax kind of package that you're developing to the real economic substance that also needs to be put in Latvia. And that means you need to have an idea what kind of activities you want to attract. So I think those are the two reasons why probably kind of the current situation isn't as good as Latvia expected.
So what's the way forward for Latvia, in your opinion? What would be the correct steps to take?
I think kind of come up with a strategy. I think kind of if you have a clear kind of dot on the horizon that you want to go to, I think that helps. And then I think in order to do that, have good conversations with your businesses. Because I kind of one of the things that I've also gotten back is that kind of sometimes maybe policymakers are not aware of how much administrative costs or how much economic distortion some policy elements create. You can only be aware of that if you have good conversations with business. And that is something that, in particular in the current complex climate, where there's so much complexity in business, you need to make sure that what the policy aim is achieved with the measures and that there's no overkill. So I would say create a strategy, but do so after very good conversations and consultations with business.
Another part, which I already mentioned shortly, but which was done in Latvia, was this sort of so-called windfall taxes, which, to explain to our listeners, I understand is basically taxes levied on businesses or individuals who have profited due to unexpected circumstances. And in case of Latvia, this was this solidarity contribution to banks. What would be your comment on this kind of practice globally currently? I understand that this is not the only region or like country where it has been done, but maybe you have had some comment on how it has been done also in Latvia.
Yes. Yeah, and it's indeed kind of windfall taxes started kind of when we had the energy crisis. So at that time, energy prices went up a lot. They went up a lot for fossil fuels, where also the costs of generating that energy kind of went up. So it was logical. But they also went up for green taxes. And for green energy, typically kind of the costs of generating the energy didn't change. So that's when kind of governments started to tax these windfalls, right, for these energy producers because they wanted to give it back to the people that had to pay these very high energy prices. But that also triggered the thinking, we need more tax money. Let's get most of the tax from those that are earning the most profits. And banks have been very profitable kind of lately because of the high interest rates, with the emphasis on lately, because there have also been very scarce years, right, during the financial crisis, etc. So the thinking is kind of let the broadest shoulders bear most of the burden. I think one of the things that you can comment about what Latvia did with the financial institutions is that you can wonder, if you look at a life cycle of kind of a financial institution, whether the windfall was that big, because there were also shortfalls at certain periods, so maybe you needed to take them into account. And then the second thing I think that you can wonder is, if you do a windfall tax, and the way it has been designed, there are so many bells and whistles to it that really do not seem to wonder whether there is a possibility. So if you tax, that's fine, tax the profits for defense spending. But I think kind of what creating problem is the whistles and the bells in relation to if you grow your investment or your lending portfolio, then you get all these discounts. And
so it's not uniform for everyone, but there's different kind of exceptions in a way. You mean?
Yeah, there's some form of discrimination. But I think the most important thing is that there's this element to it that suggests that the levy can be taken back, kind of that you can get a discount if you grow your lending portfolios. And I think the key question is it realistic that, again, these lending portfolios will grow? It's only realistic if there is kind of our businesses that want to borrow more because they have additional investments to make. And that brings us back to the point we made before. So you need to have innovative businesses that need the money in order to get there. It's not like if you have more money to spend, that will automatically kind of occur out of nothing. And that's exactly what we're seeing, right? We're seeing that kind of there's not that pool of interested people. There's not the demand. There's not that pool of interested businesses to borrow more. So kind of what is happening is that actually this rule is only creating more competition within kind of the banking sector, but not growing kind of the investments in Latvia, I would expect. So that is, I think, something to watch, right? Are these measures reaching their purpose? And if you want to just levy more money of the financial sector, maybe it's easier to do just a clean kind of, I'm levying X% tax instead of all those kind of different other elements that they have added to it.
Okay, so in a sense, what I'm hearing is that this is not really solving the core issue of too low investment, maybe in Latvia. And that, okay, but I think you touched upon this, but about the lower tax rates in several countries, but it normally works that way, that the lower the tax, the more income the country collects. There is a correlation like that, or...
Not necessarily, right? I think what you see is that there are some countries. There are some countries with low tax rate, but if you don't also facilitate the investment climate and the economic climate, you will nevertheless not attract anything. Kind of, if you have a rock somewhere and you attach like a 0% tax rate to it, but there's no way to have economic activities there, you will not attract anything. So I think the combination is very important. Kind of the country still needs to have the labor, the capital, and kind of the assets available that the businesses need to do their activities. And that means that kind of a tax rate by itself will not attract investment. It's an element, but by itself it will not do the trick.
Speaking of tax rates, I have a philosophical question to you, which seems very interesting to me, because the Scandinavian countries, I think, have one of the highest tax burdens in the world, and they also rank among the happiest countries in the world. Is this a causal correlation, or do you see any correlation in these facts or not?
I do, and I think Europe as such, I would think that Europe kind of ranks many of the happiest countries in the world. And why is that? And that is, I think, a very important one, because we have this social welfare system. Maybe kind of compared to the US or China, we don't have the super, super, super rich people. And we may have a few, but we don't have like the big digital companies, etc. But we also don't have the super, super, super poor, because we have this welfare system. Such a welfare system is expensive. It's more expensive than not having it. And that also means that if we want to compete with a US, if we want to compete with a China, we need to take account of the fact that we need more tax income. We need to be more competitive than they are to be actually competitive on the world scale. So that is something to keep in mind. It's not accidental that we're so happy. We're happy because we have in Europe very good social welfare systems, and we want actually all countries to adopt it. So maybe there's still some growth to be achieved by other countries that are not Scandinavia. And that means we need the tax income in. That means we need to be competitive to pay for it. Otherwise, we will be maybe a US, but then our population will not be happier than they were. Scandinavian people will not be happier if they turn into a US. So I think that's exactly what the Draghi report wants to achieve. He said we need a competitiveness to pay for the way we are now. And then we will, so we need to take account of that social cohesion element that we're fighting for.
Yeah, when preparing for today's podcast, I think I read a quote. I don't remember the author and the quote perfectly anymore, but that taxes is what civilized countries pay to remain civilized, in a way. I guess that's the story about Scandinavia or the EU, in a way.
Exactly.
And another question I wanted to ask you about US or all of the world currently, basically, is that I guess the most popular person right now is Donald Trump, and his favorite word is tariffs. What do you think will be the effect of his promises or forecasts on tariffs on the EU, on Latvia, or maybe the world overall?
Yeah, I think tariffs, is the most scary thing for loads of businesses, because it will create economic distortions. Effectively, tariffs always lower worldwide economic growth. Tariffs mean higher prices, means inefficiencies that should not be there. Donald Trump wants to use these tariffs for political gain. He wants to use it to bargain with countries about effects he wants to achieve. So he has announced them towards China because he thinks there's an unbalance there, because China is subsidizing much more. And of course, there's this technology competition going on. He also said towards Denmark, I'm going to tackle you because of Greenland. So it has a political motive. And I think Europe should think very hard about, in order to avoid these mechanisms, how do I create an economic and political balance with the US? And I know that the EU has been preparing much more than they did for the first EU Trump presidency. So I hope they have their reactions available. What I think is that the tariffs of the Trump, they are the digital services taxes in Europe. We have levied digital services taxes from the EU or the US tech giants. So I think there needs to be a conversation between political leaders about digital services taxes versus tariffs. And maybe there can be some form of agreement saying, well, there is going to be a standstill on both, as long as we agree that neither of us takes action, then we have a stable situation. That would be, I think, the best solution for the EU to get to.
This is a very interesting perspective, which I hadn't thought about. So we do have some arguments in our pockets.
We also have our tools, yes.
Great. As you know, this podcast, or the main goal of this podcast, is more about speaking about private investments and development of private investment culture in Latvia. And using the opportunity, I wanted to ask you more about this theme. Maybe what, in your experience, globally are the best best tax instruments or grant instruments or something like that help develop an investment culture and the savings culture?
Yes. Well, and I'm not sure I'm exactly going to answer your question, but I think there's a lot of opportunity coming up for private investment. So if you look at the Draghi report, and if we look at the conversation we've just had, there's going to be a lot of money needed for investment in digitalization and transformation and innovation. So that means that the public sector cannot do that on their own. They need that private investment to join forces with them to get to that innovation. And I think there will be many, many tools that will become available to get private investors to invest more risky, more innovative, more in innovation. And in that way,
within the EU,
and especially within the EU, and that will also be the case, I expect, in Latvia. So what you will see is mechanisms such as, for example, one of the suggestions in the Draghi report is say, what if we would create pension schemes that allow people to put money into a pension fund and do so tax-free. So you don't have to pay tax on your income when you put it into the fund. And then it grows, right? You don't have to pay wealth tax as it grows. And you only have to pay tax once you are a pensioner, when you get the money. That would be a way to avoid what you just mentioned on the wealth taxes, because there will not be any. People will be putting money in the pension fund, and then the pension funds will be putting it into innovative investments that will grow that pension money to a level that you can have a very comfortable pension. So I think we will see much more of those types of schemes, getting more private funding in big pools to be invested into the EU. And then of course there will be also some public money that will safeguard that people are willing to take that risk, because of course they want to make sure that when they put the money in now, they get it back later. So that is where the public comfort needs to come from. So that is what Draghi is aiming at, and what I think is interesting for private investors to keep an eye out for.
Okay, so because what I understood also from the Draghi report is that basically the EU is countries are rich countries with a lot of savings that are not invested in the EU, just in short.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, but this is an interesting perspective. Yeah. Are you an investor yourself? Do you invest in markets?
Actually, I'm not. And the reason is quite simple. First of all, I came to the to EY from government. So, I didn't have a lot of money, because governments typically don't pay a lot. But then in EY, we have very strict independence rules. So I decided to play it safe and not to invest. So I'm not a big expert myself.
But you're an expert on taxes and on taxes and investments. Yes. But thanks a lot, I think, for a very valuable conversation. We are approaching the end already, and maybe some last suggestions from your side. What would you suggest, I guess in this case, to policymakers in Latvia or EU, how to move forward?
Yes. So my advice would be to start talking very actively with business about, what is the goal on the horizon that we want to achieve, and how are we going to use the business input to design tax systems that are actually fit for purpose, without overkill, without unnecessary admin cost. So I think that is the most important thing. To create a competitive tax environment in the EU and in Latvia, but that needs to be supported by the economic system out there.
Thank you, Marlies. I think a wonderful suggestion. And thank you to our listeners for listening today. And let's see you at the next episode.
Thank you.
Audio saturā dzirdētā informācija nav uzskatām par ieguldījumu konsultāciju vai ieteikumu slēgt finanšu tirgus darījumus vai ieguldīt finanšu instrumentos.
Paldies, ka klausījāties! Lai izdevusies diena un uz tikšanos nākamajā sarunā!